and welcome to this first session of this new series, Empathy with Nature, Thinking Like a Plant. Yes. It's great to see everyone who is interested in the subject, empathy with nature. Yes. Vibrating with excitement. And also welcome back those who were involved in the series I did last year called The School of Love. And as a bit of a segue from that series, I would like to bring a quote that was used several times in the School of Love, a quote from Rudolf Steiner that goes like this: "Only if I love something can it reveal itself to me. Only if I love something can it reveal itself to me." And the reason this is an appropriate quote to start off this Empathy with Nature series is because this love, this type of love that Rudolf Steiner is referring to, is the empathy that we're referring to in this title when we speak of empathy with nature. And it is this mysterious quality of empathy we'll be discussing and developing in order to come into closer contact with the essential nature of nature. The essential nature of nature. At this moment, I want to open up with a question. It's always good to begin with a question because a question puts you on a quest. And this is also the convention when entering into a scientific inquiry of something, to have a question or some kind of problem that is to be looked at and potentially resolved. So I want to start with a question that points to a problem. The question is, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with we? What's wrong with we? We know that to a large degree that we are influenced by the environment we're in. And in the case of what is wrong with me or what is wrong with we, I'm not referring to the physical environment so much that we're in, but rather the intellectual and emotional environment that we live in. In terms of our current times, with the COVID pandemic, there has certainly been a rise in a sense of disconnect and alienation in the mental and emotional environment, with lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, social distancing, telling us to wear masks, signs everywhere telling us to stay 6 feet apart, and even a growing divide in society between what is being heralded by the media and politicians as the vaccinated against the unvaccinated. Division. But this is just a current event, which, like all things, will pass and morph into something else. So I'm not going to spend time looking at this micro moment of this current time. What I'm more interested in is the intellectual and philosophical environment of the entire modern era that we're in. The mental environment we've all grown up in and been educated in that is largely influential in our approach to the world in general has a contributing sense to our disconnect and alienation. We live in an age that is very much influenced by science, right? Or at least the science that has been developed over the past 500 years. And in turn, our Western science has been influenced by Western philosophy, especially its development since the period known as the Age of Reason. And so in these modern times, we've been overshadowed by a philosophy of science that informs our mental and emotional environment, which then has shaped us and informed us. Informed us. Led to the way we are within and the way we see and think. The word science means to know. And so the form of science as it stands today has been a great influence in the way you and I approach the knowing of things. And in some ways, science has replaced religion, becoming a new religion, handing us fixed ideas, much the same way religion can and does at times. But it's interesting that the word religion, coming from the Latin religare, means to rejoin. Rejoin. That was and is the real intention behind religion, the rejoining of something. Same with the word yoga, which means union. In the deepest aspects of yoga philosophy, yoga is about uniting. And while I don't necessarily advocate a return to these older forms as a way to rejoin and find unity and to overcome the alienation and disconnect we feel, the question is whether or not science, as it stands today, as a new religion, as taught in the Western science form, is sufficient in replacing these older forms and providing a sense of connection that we may be seeking. Especially when we're talking about connecting with the essential nature of nature. Does science really provide that bridge as we know it now? If the meaning of science is knowing, then we can ask, what is the state of knowing? What is the state of knowing these days? We certainly know a lot of things, and the rate of knowing, or at least the accumulation of knowledge, is increasing exponentially. Even as we speak, new things are being discovered and known. But do we really know things? Are we really knowing things in the environment around us, and especially in the natural realm, the natural physical environment in which we are growing and incubating? It depends. It depends. If we were just analyzing things, giving things names, categorizing them, defining them, describing them in terms of their outer nature, and we stop there, what do we have? Well, we know something about their outer nature. That's what we know, and that is all. And in fact, to a large degree, we are telling things what they are. We're telling them what they are. We're telling it what it is, whatever the object is, rather than an approach where it can tell us what it is. We make this mistake with people all the time, where we see someone and we assume we know all about them, right? We've all experienced this. You see them and you make this judgment. We judge on external appearances. And then we may be shocked or surprised if we actually open up a conversation with this person and they begin to speak. And we find out that they were actually something quite different than what our finite perception of them and judgment thought. So now you might be asking, how do we do this in the natural realm? How can we get into that sort of conversation with nature where it will open up and start to tell us about itself rather than us imposing our judgment on it, our finite ideas based on external things? How can we get into that kind of rapport with nature, thereby reestablishing nature as our teacher. Right? The way it was for our ancestors, where nature was a teacher and not just an object of manipulation. Right? I'll repeat the quote from Rudolf Steiner. Only if I love something can it reveal itself to me. So this quote is stating that there can only be a knowing when that something reveals itself to me. That's when we can truly know. And that brings into question some of the ways that we have been approaching things. Has it been things speaking to us, revealing to us, showing something of their essential nature? It suggests that we may not really be fully knowing things in the physical environment because of where we are in our inner environment. We're really not knowing things in the external environment because of where we are in our inner environment. Does that make sense? It's really quite simple and straightforward. So our knowing is limited because we're limited. And so in approaching again the question and the problem I stated at the beginning, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with we? We could say, well, perhaps what's wrong is that there's actually two ways of knowing, two types of knowing, analytical and intuitive. Two sides to thinking and knowing, and we're not using both sides. For some of you, this may be opening up big questions and even a big can of worms when we start speaking of intuitive knowing. You might be saying, gee, when I studied science at school, I was never taught about the intuitive side of knowing. Nobody ever mentioned that in chemistry class or biology class. Can we really develop intuitive knowing, intuitive thinking, the same way we were taught and developed analytical thinking? Is it possible? This is where thinking like a plant comes in. Ta-da! And the reason we can look to the plant as a guide and teacher in this regard is because the plant actually demonstrates both sides of this cognitive activity, the intuitive and the analytical. On the one hand, the plant has structure to it, form. There's a certain logic to its form. It needs to adhere to the mechanics of physics and chemistry in its biology in order for it to exist and maintain itself. On the other hand, the plant is living. It's living, it's organic, it's spontaneous, and demonstrates a livingness that is aware, making choices, is alive and mobile in its movements. It's demonstrating something through its outer form and its livingness about how we can be inwardly. So we're going to be doing some exercises and practices. This is part of what this series is going to do, is introduce some practices and things. So everyone's going to need to get some paper. You'll actually need at least 3 pieces of paper this evening. And I've got pencil crayons, I've got block crayons and stick crayons. There's paper there and there with little folders so you can work on top of it. And so with your paper and pencils, I want you to draw something that really expresses the feel of plantness based on what I just described, how a plant has both this form, this lawfulness of a form that holds it, contains it, follows, I use the word mechanics, or the lawfulness, so it can contain life, but also has this life to it, this organic, spontaneous movement to it. So you can do this really quickly on a page and then do it on another page if you want, or just do one really slowly. Going to give you about 5 minutes to see what comes through you in capturing this sense of plantness. So now we can have a little circle time here, see if anybody wants to share some of what came through that express plantness, really in those two sides, that of form, but also livingness. I guess I'll start with mine here. I can hold it up to the camera. And of course, it's not really meant to be an artistic piece. We're doing art, but not to try necessarily do some sort of masterpiece, but really the assignment was to capture those qualities of something with form and life, something that follows mechanical laws, but at the same time has some intelligence to it, some living intelligence that's functioning. So you can see that there? Yeah. Who else would like to share theirs? I can.
Yeah, I was just trying to feel into a plant through my pencil, and I kind of went into like a duality of line work because I was thinking about the dualities in plants, this underground nature and the above ground, and like when you were talking about the mechanical and where it's from, it felt like that was very kind of like this other jaggedy root line work, and then the spirals at the top kind of like, the essence of life and reaching up, and then wanted to kind of overlay some like blue in there, just feeling like this other color and essence that comes out of plants, sort of like the aura of plants, and it's kind of like a geyser. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it really does capture that duality. You were working with more of the crystalline mechanical sense down here,
exactly,
very definite form, kind of, more ethereal going up here, that geyser of energy, more spirals. Yeah. Can I pass it around? Okay, well, thank you for doing that. We got some more coming, but at this point I'd like to drop a name. The name of Wolfgang Johann von Gutta, a German philosopher-scientist who lived between the mid-1700s and mid-1800s. His name is spelled Goethe, and it's kind of funny to say. It's actually kind of fun to say, Goethe, and you'll be hearing it. So why don't we all get used to it by repeating it together a few times. Goethe. 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 There's a German girl over here. You want to say it? Goethe. Goethe. Goethe, Goethe, Goethe. Not Goethe, the way it's spelled, but Goethe. And the reason we'll hear this name repeated throughout this series is because Goethe is kind of the patron saint of this work, if you will. Because like so many of his era, these people were both philosophers and scientists. And they were wrestling with questions about knowledge and knowing. One could say the epistemological questions, or the science of knowing, epistemology. And while I don't want to get too heady in this series, each session I'll present a little component that could be called the philosophy of science. The philosophy of science. And the reason I feel the need to do this is so we continually look at and even objectify the environment we grew up in. The intellectual and emotional environment we grew up in that has largely informed the way we are. Because we have to know where we are in order to get where we're going, right? So if we are to continue in asking this question, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with we? We have to understand what it is that led to the way we are. So in approaching this idea of the philosophy of science, as I said earlier, the word science comes from the root word to know. And the word philosophy is made up of two words. Philo, to love, and Sophie, which means wisdom. And so these philosophers, scientists of the rising age of reason, such as Immanuel Kant, who lived approximately around the same time as Goethe, mid-1700s to mid-1800s, they were passionately seeking wisdom about the nature of knowing. And the work of Immanuel Kant is unquestionably one of the most influential figures in modern Western philosophy and has had a huge impact on the state of your and my knowing, even today. So to put it succinctly, all of Kant's wrestling with ideas ultimately led to the conclusion that we can't really know. All of his efforts, his monster mind, really came to this conclusion that we can't really know, that there was no conclusive evidence, at least in his mind, that a human had the capacity to know anything for sure. Except maybe what was going on in his or her own mind. Which ironically was in his mind that you couldn't really know anything for sure. So Kant brought us to this precipice, to the edge of an abyss where we still stand today, a seemingly unbridgeable abyss whose yawning gape says we can't really connect to the other side. We can't know what is beyond ourselves, which is making all modern pursuits for knowledge starting from a state of doubt. All modern pursuits for knowledge really start from this state of doubt. Can we know? Can we know it all? Can we know anything at all? And this is not altogether bad in its implications, because at the same time, during the Age of Reason, the foundations of the church and religious faith were beginning to crumble with the rise of this encroaching doubt. So the old-time religion, the religare, and the attempts to rejoin through religion was losing ground. Faith was being replaced by doubt. And even the great German thinker, Immanuel Kant, could not go beyond that. We can go back even further in the rise of this era to the likes of Renee Descartes, who is best known for his philosophical statement, cogito ergo sum. Anyone know what that means? I think, therefore I am. But most people don't realize that this is just part of what he said. The full proclamation of what he said is dubito ergo cogito ergo sum. Do you know what that means?
Therefore I am.
Thank you. You got it. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. Playing off this whole theme of doubt being really the keystone, the cornerstone of modern Western thought. And so René Descartes really pointed to how the only real thing a person can know for sure is the doubt they experience. For him, the doubting was real. It meant he was having a real thought experience, albeit a doubting one, but therefore he knew he was real because he was having a doubting thought. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. Period. And so the philosophical thought of these great thinkers, such as Immanuel Kant and Renee Descartes, despite all the intellectual prowess they put to this problem of knowing, set the tone of the scientific age we are currently in, where we also struggle with the question of how to truly know anything at all. And it's important to see the subtext that was set in Descartes' proclamation of I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. And that is, this really set the tone that it is the I that knows. It is the I that knows. Ergo, or ego, is the Latin word for I. The I, ego, is the one seeking to know. So it was really a proclamation of the I, ego, at that time, awakening. But at the same time, this set a wedge with everything else outside of himself, everything else outside of the ego. I, ego, and everything else beyond me. And this is the fundamental characteristic of modern Western science. There is the I, and there is the other. I and the object, or what is known today as objective science, which puts all its power and technology into what religion sought to do, to rejoin, to bridge the gap, or you could say overcome the sense of disconnect and alienation to the world around us, the world outside of us. But how successful has this new religion of science been in its current form in overcoming this sense of disconnect and alienation between the I and what is beyond the I? There's something referred to as the Cartesian Split, which refers to this Cartesian dualism that Renee Descartes heralded in, the dualism between the I and the other. The Cartesian split also refers to the perceived split between mind and body, that there's a dualism between mind and body that Descartes also proclaimed. And so this sense of division, separateness, alienation that actually has been growing for a long time, and not just since the beginning of this pandemic, and is now continuing to be perpetrated by the philosophy of science that we have, which is based on Western philosophy, is something we are overshadowed by. We are living in the shadow of this in our thoughts, in our minds. This Cartesian split very much informs our inner environment, the intellectual and emotional environment we grew up in, we're educated in, and live in, day out. And this has led to something else, something known as Cartesian anxiety. Cartesian anxiety, it's a thing. You can look it up in Wikipedia. If it's in Wikipedia, it must be a thing, right? We are all actually suffering, in a semi-conscious way, suffering with Cartesian anxiety. This is a low-grade background sense that pervades our entire being all the time. A sense of disconnect and alienation between ourselves and the other, ourselves and the world, ourselves and nature. Even a disconnect between our body and mind that seems irreconcilable, unbridgeable. So, Cartesian anxiety. This is the answer to the question, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with we? You have Cartesian anxiety and you didn't even know it. We're all suffering from Cartesian anxiety. See, what a revelation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You can name it, you can tame it. This is really at the root of our suffering. And so this is the thing that we really need to be working on before we go barreling ahead any further in our quest, and I dare say lust for knowledge. We really need to address the way we know, the way we can know something, the way we can connect. We need to look at the way we science. We need to deal with this Cartesian split and the resultant Cartesian anxiety. So, this is one of the major intentions behind this series. Empathy with nature, thinking like a plant. But before we deep dive into that, I also have a small thing we can do, which I like to do. Every time someone comes into the loft, I spritz them with a spray I call anti-Cartesian anxiety spray. It's actually an oil blend I've got over there called Stress Away. But I take Stress Away and I mix it in my spritzer. Jazz, can you bring that bottle over, that red one? I take Stress Away, put it with water in a spritzer, and I call it my anti-Cartesian anxiety spray. And whenever anyone comes into the loft, okay, come here for a minute. You see, you have Cartesian anxiety and you don't even know it. So, may I spritz you?
Yeah.
You feel better? More relaxed, more connected? You feeling it?
Yeah, I don't know.
How's that? Breathe it in. Who else? Someone else here. Michael? Oh, okay. See that. Okay. How's that feel?
Very good.
Good? Feel good? Katie? Would you like some anti-Cartesian anxiety spray?
Yes.
Get that stress away?
Yes.
All right. Good.
It's good.
Well, it's good. Yes. Well, this was kind of like a Band-Aid solution, but we're going to be working on the cure in empathy with nature, thinking like a plant. It's coming. And so is the basket of essential oils I've got sitting over there. You're welcome to pass those around. I have a whole basket of them there. These are pure gifts, pure essential oil from nature herself, from the plant realm. And when we connect with these essential oils from plants, we're connecting with their essential nature, their vibration, and we take that vibration in, which can change our consciousness and is already a step toward thinking like a plant. A step toward overcoming our Cartesian dualism. But there's more than that we can do. There's much work to be done. There is actually major work in transformation to be done. As we've seen, we are influenced and informed by our environment. So not only do we need to transform ourselves, we need to transform the mental and emotional environment in which we're living and growing. This means we need to transform the way we do science, personally and collectively. And a step in that is to look at the word science and see it not just as a noun, which we typically do, but to see it also as a verb, to science. It is something we do. And as we change the way we do it, we will change and transform the way we are. And so in each session of this series, we will look a little bit at the philosophy of science, to look at how the love of wisdom, philosophia, is being played out in our quest for knowing, our sciencing as a verb. And then the most important part of this series is the actual doing it, the sciencing, and the how of doing it. How to engage with the new perspectives that'll be presented here, and even more importantly, the new practices that will be presented here that will truly bridge us, rejoin us with the things that are other than ourselves, things that are beyond our ego, to really ultimately fulfill that intention of the ancient religions to rejoin, and the intention of yoga for unity, to overcome the sense of alienation and disconnect we feel with the world, with nature, with each other, due to this Cartesian split and Cartesian anxiety, and address this root of the problem: what's wrong with me? What's wrong with we? And I know, talking to some of you, very excited about coming here, had all sorts of ideas and maybe even some preconceptions about, what we're going to be doing in learning to think like a plant, communicating with plants and dancing with plants and making music with plants, and all of that is open. It's all under this umbrella, and we've got this series of sessions to come at this from different angles and also go through it in something of a systematic way, so that we can make this a personal transformation journey. I also want to insert a little bit of my background at this outset, a little bit about me, so we understand the inspiration behind this program. I'm not going to go into a big story about myself, but currently I am in a 2-year program, 2-year training with the Nature Institute, which is located in a beautiful area of rural New York State called Hawthorne Valley, which is also the home of one of the oldest biodynamic farms in the United States. There's also a farm store there where they're allowed to sell their own raw, unpasteurized milk, which I got to sample and enjoy. There's a big Waldorf school there too. So it's an interesting place to be as part of this 2-year training, and really enjoyed being there for 2 weeks, a 2-week residency last July, where I was able to work with the faculty there and the rest of the student body. And at that time also setting myself up for this year to come, where I'll be continuing to do studies and group meetings over Zoom. And then next July, I'll be returning there again for another 2-week residency. Really looking forward to that. So part of the purpose of this series is to work on my project for the year. Each of the students had to come up with a project and work on it over the year, and then when we go back for the residency, we have to make a presentation. And so my project for the year is called, as you know, Empathy with Nature. Thinking like a plant, which is also the name of this book by Craig Holdridge, who is the founder of the Nature Institute down in Hawthorne Valley, Thinking Like a Plant. And Craig has written a number of books. He's a faculty there, and he's going to be my mentor for the year. Be having conversations with him regularly regarding my project, and I'll be sending him recordings of these sessions to review and critique. So let's give a shout out to Craig Holdridge. Woo. Hi, Craig. Hope you like this.
Thanks, Craig.
Talk to you Zoom. And one other thing I hope will come out of this Empathy with Nature program is an Empathy with Nature camping trip for people who would like to actually go out into nature beyond the confines of the loft or the Zoom room, to go out into the woods and experience it firsthand and do practices together there in the forest. In fact, this past August, I did something I had never done before. First time, going on a solo canoe trip. I've done canoe trips before, but had never thought I could do it by myself. Felt kind of intimidated at the thought. But, going out into the backcountry by yourself for a amount of time. But it felt different this year after my 2 weeks in the Nature Institute. And I guess I had more incentive to go out into the woods, to go deeper into the phenomenon of things, to experience it in solitude. So I ended up doing a total of 15 days solo, camping in northern Ontario, portaging and cooking for myself and paddling around. Didn't actually take a canoe. I took my stand-up paddleboard and traveled around on that and portaged that, and actually worked quite well. My inflatable stand-up paddleboard. People are, occasionally you see people on the trails and they're coming with their canoes and they look up and here's this guy trucking by with a inflatable stand-up paddleboard. You go, whoa, that's kind of different. Never seen that before.
Surfer Jesse, crossing the Great North.
Yeah. Wow.
That's awesome.
I've never been one that's shied away from doing things differently. And I think that's part of just living thinking, looking for new ways, different ways, innovative ways. So it was great. I took my reading materials, like Thinking Like a Plant, while I'm out there with all the plants. I'm doing a lot of thinking and thinking about being like a plant and thinking about like a plant. Something like that. And so now I feel I want to offer this opportunity to others as well, to go into the woods and have not only an experience of nature, but to work at empathy with nature, to deepen their capacity for this thing called empathy, which we'll be looking at as we go along, and to really come from a new place in their sciencing, in their knowing, in their connecting, where nature can once again become our teacher, right? Rather than us telling what nature is, to really go out and let nature proclaim to us through these newly cultivated capacities something of itself, and to teach us, to guide us. So more about that later. But if you're on the Empathy with Nature email list, you'll hear all about this. You'll get announcements for the classes each week to remind you, and also an email with a link of a recording if you want to go back and review this and review the assignments that I'll be giving at the end of each session. But now we need to focus on what's in the series. And in doing that, we're going to do a practice which will set us up with the nature assignment for the week. But actually, before we do that, I'm going to give you a quote from our patron, Gutta. Hear from Gutta here for a moment. And then I'm going to ask you a question. Gutta said, "If we want to behold nature in a living way, we must follow her example and make ourselves as mobile and flexible as nature herself." I'm going to repeat that. If we want to behold nature in a living way, we must follow her example and make ourselves as mobile and flexible as nature herself. So the question is, do you feel as flexible and mobile as nature herself? Of course, we're not talking about physically, we're talking about on another level of your being, inwardly, in your inner life. So you're going to ask yourself that question, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, how mobile and flexible are you inside? Now don't think about it, just let a number come to you spontaneously and write it down. Do you feel as flexible and mobile as nature herself on a scale of 1 to 10? See what number pops in. Write it down. We will ask this question a few times through this series as we work at the practices, and we can measure how we are progressing. And if you're not sure what being mobile and flexible inside looks like, let's approach this by asking what the opposite might look like. What is the opposite of inner mobility and flexibility?
Oppressed.
Oppressed.
Rigid.
Rigid.
Or
Static.
suppressed.
Static.
Stuck.
Stuck.
Defensive.
Defensive. Narrow-minded.
Judgmental.
Judgmental.
That's how I feel.
Stuck in the human condition.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, these are all great counter images of inner flexibility, mobility. Great. So we have that as a benchmark as we go forward. Yeah, really all these things in a word means you're stuck. You're not going anywhere.
Like the plant. has
Muzzled, not free,
Wilted.
wilted.
freedom. I can think about freedom and I'm feeling the plantness in me, but still not allowed. I'm not allowed.
Disallowing.
I'm not allowed because by some others. The society.
Contained
Mm-hmm.
by others, controlled.
Controlled, yeah.
Right.
Restricted, yes.
Restricted.
You're thinking, I don't have freedom for my physical choice, like how I wanna live, what I wanna eat, you know?
So I'm hearing
A lot of
two ways where it can be something that's imposed from externally, or it can be something internal,
Internally. It's
or
like
a blend of both.
it's blend because that affects internally. Yeah.
Right. What comes externally can really impact you, which is what we've been saying.
This
This
Yeah.
Cartesian
Mhm.
dualism that really is the mental emotional environment we were raised in. Right. So you
You know
can
what I
feel the
mean?
potential of 10,
I feel the
but
plants,
the experience
If
is
I-
right down at 2.
but I'm not letting grow. I can't grow the way I want to grow.
Okay, so there's that gap
There is
between where you're at and where you feel you could be.
In,
Well, I'm just going to say, we need to be patient at this point in the journey because there is a big job ahead in transforming ourselves and transforming culture, transforming the way we science, the way we know things. And that's really what this series is poised to do, is get us in alignment with this transformational journey. So there's lots more to come in this series to assist us in unpacking and the fertilization of ourselves, you could say, and learning to think like a plant. But now I want to get into the practice we will take into the week, and I'm going to explain it first, then we will do it, and then afterwards you can find the instructions for this practice on the empathy with Nature webpage on the Power for Conscious Living website, and you'll get that link sent to you in an email. And I'll also post this in the chat at the end. But this beginning practice, as the nature assignment for the week, is taken from the opening pages of Rudolf Steiner's classic text, How to Know Higher Worlds. And in this text about inner development, that's really what this book is about, this exercise I'm about to give is the very first exercise that Steiner himself gives, and is considered part of the preparation stage of inner development. And it's helpful to know that there are stages of development, just as there are stages in what? The development of a plant, right? So we're beginning at the beginning, preparation stage, in on this journey of inner development. And so, like farmers in our own inner life, we will approach this work with patience, not expecting immediate results, but knowing that what we plant and cultivate will bear fruit over time. But having said that, I actually find this first exercise, when done faithfully, produces results very quickly. And one can almost immediately experience nature in a new way. In fact, the simplicity of this exercise is in contrast to its great profundity. And as a preparatory exercise, it lays the groundwork for what will follow. So the intention of this first practice is to enliven our thinking and feeling life in very definite ways. In doing this, we simply direct our attention toward certain processes in the physical environment around us. To begin with, we concentrate our attention on something that is living, budding, growing, flourishing. Okay, this could be a house plant or something outside in the garden or in the park. Something that is living. We see it budding, growing, flourishing. And we hold our attention on this object, this thing that is living, growing, and thriving. And you give yourself over to the impressions of it, to the exclusion of anything else. You really have to focus and concentrate and exclude anything else, and allow these impressions to evoke certain thoughts and feelings that are connected to something that's living, growing, flourishing. Then the second part of the exercise, we do the same thing, but something that is withering, fading, and dying away. And we're going to do this in a moment. And where we're going to dwell on these things for a short time and let the impressions alone work upon us, work in us, evoking these different thoughts and feelings, which Steiner says in the text, to quote him, to look at things as actively and precisely as possible. We will notice rising up within us new kinds of feelings and thoughts that we never knew before. The more often we focus our attention first on something growing and flourishing, and then on something withering and dying away, the more lively and active these feelings will become. And because it's always good to know what is the intention and result of doing any exercises, Steiner also says, eventually, just as the eyes and ears of our physical organism are formed by natural forces out of inanimate matter, so organs of inner seeing are formed out of the feelings and thoughts that arise in relation to growing and flourishing, withering and dying. End quote. When I reflect on this practice, I think how extremely simple yet extremely profound it is, and what logical sense it makes. But by focusing on the most fundamental things in our outer physical environment, things that are living and things that are dying, we can use these impressions, you could say, to reset our inner environment. To reset our inner environment, or what Steiner says, leads to the most significant effects. And with this real great reset, this inner reset, we can build our inner life out of the material of these fundamental thoughts and feelings, which then leads to what he refers to as a new inner seeing. So we're going to do this now. And to aid us in that, I have some plants here, and I'm going to hold up my camera in front of them. First, something that's green and growing, and then something that's brown and dying. But there's also, and that's for the people that are on Zoom, but people here in the room can also see it here. And I've done this. It doesn't actually matter if you're doing it through the medium of a computer. You can still connect with those qualities of things living and things dying. But there's also things here in the room. You'll see there's something that's quite green and growing, and there's something there that's quite brown and dying, if not dead. So any questions about this practice? Because this is something to do during the week, every day, even several times a day, to start to fashion the organs of inner seeing. So focusing on something that is green, growing, thriving. Giving yourself wholly over to the impressions. The feelings, the thoughts that arise. Really tune in with your feeling life. Notice what you notice. Stay focused. All right, now switching to something here that's withering, dying. And in contrast, the feelings and thoughts this evokes. Now we're going to go back to something living, flourishing. Feel the difference in your feeling and thought life. Switching back to the other, the dying, decaying. Going to go back to the living thing, and just for contrast's sake, to do it a bit more quickly, we can, I actually like to do this myself. I go to the garden and I go back and forth very quickly. It can even be feeling into both at the same time, if you will. It's a bit of a trick, but it's like microseconds where you can feel the difference going back and forth. Okay, then letting the practice go. Any questions about this practice that will be your assignment for the week? Yes. Question is how often? I don't think there's really any limit. You might have other things to do with your day, other than spend time hanging out with the plants.
Don't. Is there like a maximum amount of time I should spend in this practice before something adverse happens?
Well, it's not something that you do for hours and hours. I think if you've got plants around, you could periodically during your day just take a little plant time to tune in.
That was about 5 minutes. Is that like a session?
Yeah, well, you want to pay attention to yourself as well.
Okay.
This is the thing. You're developing your inner environment through this. So if you're feeling fatigued or bored, or you're thinking about other things, then it's probably time to give it a break and come back to it fresh later. So this is part of the intuitive path. We really have to be listening within. So I'm not really going to give any kind of set dogmatic answer to these things. Just laying out the practice as it is, and some things you're just going to have to figure out on your own.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. But there's just one other thing which points to the most important aspect of this practice and all of the assignments I'll be giving in each session, is that you do have to do it in order to get results. Right? We're moving beyond theory, we're moving beyond talk here, because there's enough theorizing and talk in the world about things. And this program is meant to be very practical and hands-on, where there will be a balance of the theory and the practices, but doing the practices are critical in order to get results. And as I like to say in other trainings that I offer here, I bring 50%, you bring the other 50%, and guess what? We have 100% participation. And in light of that, I want to finish off with a poem that I am reminded of for this work. It's a poem I saw many times as a schoolboy. I went to school at a very strict English boarding school with emphasis on work and doing things. And in the evening after study hall, we would gather at a snack table for milk and cookies. And above the table was a poem framed on the wall, a poem called Results and Roses by Edgar Albert Guest. And I'm going to read it to you. The person who wants a garden fair, or small or very big, with flowers growing here and there, must bend the back and dig. The things are mighty few on earth that wishes can attain. Whatever we want of any worth, we've got to work to gain. It matters not what goal you seek, its secret here reposes. You've got to dig from week to week to get results and roses. Takes me back to my schoolboy days, boarding school. Dig, dig, dig. Yeah, we even called one of our teachers Digger, because he was dig, dig, dig. And so here we go, starting to dig into empathy with nature, thinking like a plant. And so I'm going to give the nature play assignment right now. This is for the week, but of course it's also something for the rest of your life. And I'm going to post it in the chat, and it'll be on the Empathy with Nature webpage. I'll send the link out. It's a few things. First of all, what we just did, that's the number one thing, is to contemplate every day, even several times a day, something in nature that is living, growing, flourishing. Then contemplate its opposite, something with a sense of death, withering, dying, decaying, and go back and forth between the two, either slowly or quickly, and let these opposite poles work upon your feeling and thought life. This will grow new eyes of inner seeing. And then, having done that, you can do something similar to what we did earlier in the evening, drawing a plant. You can draw on paper your impressions of these two different states of being. Plantness that's flourishing and growing, and plantness that is withering and dying. Get your pencil crayons and whatnot, and a nice art tablet or something if you want to really go with this. And so the third exercise is one that I give all the time to everybody anywhere, called the Rukshao. Right. The Rukshao means reverse review. So this practice, you're going to take a few minutes towards the end of the day to review the events of your day and to do it in reverse. So start with the most recent thing that occurred and go backwards to the thing before that, and you might come to some event that particularly highlights, so spend some time doing that, because you're going to be looking at it from an objective perspective. This is to really develop objective consciousness. So reviewing the day in reverse, seeing yourself as if you're looking at yourself from a higher perspective, looking at yourself from a third person perspective. And this is a way to strengthen many things in yourself, including mental picturing, your memory, and empathy. So that's the third thing. And then lastly, in preparation for next week, you'll need a seed. I'll have seeds here for people that come here to the loft, but for people on Zoom, you'll need to have a seed for the practice we're going to be doing next week, and also have some nice paper and pencil crayons at home. If you're watching on Zoom, I have them here for people. So in closing, we're going to close, and then after that have refreshments. People brought all sorts of food and refreshments on the loft trough there so we can eat, but we're also going to have music making time. Got the crystal bowls here and the percussion and all sorts of things, so for those who want to hang out, we can make some music together. And until next week, may the forest be with you.